right from the birth of a child to marriage, even initiation, or even till death, rivers are connected to your rituals. Rivers are actually conferred as some kind of a benediction which is there forever and always. Rivers are not only important for India, but for all the regions across the globe. Among the natural resources, if we talk about the water, or for that matter river, is the most contentious one, and there are two reasons behind it. One, that the situation of air and soil, two other important elements of the earth system, it is comparatively more stable. But for water, the situation is most uncertain. The variations in the rainfall and the flow governed through the amount of water melting from the glaciers, they actually make the rivers most unpredictable. And in fact, over the last few decades, in the event of global warming and climate change, it has made the rivers much more unpredictable and uncertain. In fact, the second reason why rivers have become so contentious for the environmental historian is that the river is at the center of anthropogenic changes. While we study about the various kind of environmental histories, let us understand that rivers in historical time period were not considered misery at all. People in fact revered and worshipped the rivers. They lived with it, and this happened despite the fact that there had been often deluge in the rivers. So the rivers often brought deluge. Floods began to be seen as a problem only after the British tried to control the flood through permanent embankments all along the rivers. The modern canals and the dams have altered the natural flow of the rivers, and the result is that the rivers today are drying up. So what we have done is that we have disallowed the rivers to meander freely, and we have disallowed the rivers to make it flow artificially in a way. So scientists over the years have amassed a considerable amount of evidences, and they have suggested that rivers are more than just conduits of water. They include not just the water flowing in the channels, but they are also actually the resources which recharge the groundwater. The sediments they carry have rich nutrients for agriculture, and this has in fact led to the overall prosperity of many of the doab areas along the river fronts. Now, if we talk about the origin of the Yamuna river, Yamuna, for that matter, like many other rivers of India, is also very important. And Yamuna originates from the Yamunotri glacier of the Himalayas. It meets the Ganga at the Triveni Sangam in Allahabad, and from Yamunotri to the Triveni Sangam, it's almost a distance of some 1375 kilometers. In the Hindu mythology, Yamuna is actually the second most venerated river. Like the goddess Ganga, Yamuna is also called goddess Yamuna. The mythological texts refer to her as the daughter of the sun, the sister of Yamaraj, the god of death. So, if we look at the history of Yamuna, the earliest mention of the river is actually found in the Rig Veda. Even in the later epics, such as the Mahabharata, we find the Yamuna mentioned there, and it is mentioned as while there is a reference of the Pandavas, the Pandava rulers, whose capital is mentioned as Indraprastha, which was located on the banks of the river Yamuna. Now, Yamuna actually travels down from the hilly terrain of Uttarakhand and then it enters into Haryana. From there, it travels through the middle of Delhi and then enters Uttar Pradesh. During its long travel through the plains of Haryana, Delhi and Uttar Pradesh, it deposits huge amount of fertile alluvial soil like any other river, and it helps in the formation of the Ganga Yamuna Doab. The Ganga Yamuna Doab has been one of the most fertile regions of northern India. In fact, that is why most of the ruling dynasties had their centers of authority in and around the Yamuna river. In fact, most of the grand empires like that of the Mauryas, the Kushanas, the Guptas, the Harshavardhan, they all prospered in the Ganga Yamuna Doab region. Later, the Turks who went on to establish their Sultanate in Delhi also had their main source of revenue coming from the Ganga Yamuna Doab. The Delhi Sultans, however, preferred to keep their fort city away from the rivers. In fact, the Afghan ruler Sikandar Lodi was the first ruler of medieval time to conceive this idea of making Agra his capital city on the bank of the Yamuna river itself. In fact, when the Mughals came, they continued with this preference of having their capital city quite close to the river. So, they continued with this preference of Lodis. So, they too established their capital on the bank of the river Yamuna, first at Agra and later in Delhi. The rivers actually worked as some kind of natural protection for their fort from one side. Later, in 1911, when the British decided to shift their capital from Calcutta, because their empire had now acquired an all India kind of a status and character, they made Delhi as the capital of India. So, there were reasons behind it, because Delhi had already been the capital city for many centuries. So, they preferred Delhi as the new capital. There were other reasons behind it, because Delhi was very much connected to through the railway networks, but they also preferred, the British also preferred Delhi as the capital city of India. So, despite the fact that the Ganga is the most revered and most worshipped river in Hindu mythology, Yamuna too has achieved political significance in historical time period. The alluvial plain created by the Yamuna and the Ganga in Haryana, Delhi and western Uttar Pradesh had been the fulcrum of success of all the medieval dynasties. Alauddin Khalji, in particular, is famous for his market regulation system, and in fact, uh, the success story of the market regulation system depended a lot on the the amount of revenue and the grains that were coming from the Ganga Jamuna Doab region. It was largely from this region that Alauddin Khilji extracted the highest percentage of revenue, which was supposed to be more than 50%. And this was required by Alauddin Khilji to maintain his huge military. So there were massive exploitation of the cultivators under Alauddin Khilji's, but then they were able to sustain it for quite many years, because now this is the region where there has been also huge production of grains because of its natural fertility. So most of the grains were coming from the environments of Agra and Delhi under the Turks, and later even for the Mughals. In fact, one of the Tughlaq ruler, Firuz Shah Tughlaq, is famous for digging up offtake canals in Haryana, and he did so because he wanted to introduce double cropping. He wanted to introduce winter cropping in Haryana, and he dug up huge network of canals for that. Later, Shah Jahan, while he built the Red Fort, which is the Shah Jahanabad, and while he built this new capital city Shah Jahanabad, he ensured that an outlet to the river Yamuna was opened. In fact, it is from this opening that he travelled from Delhi to Agra through the Yamuna river. Shah Jahan also constructed a canal from the upper Yamuna region to bring water to his new capital city Shah Jahanabad. Very few people know that during the first trial of this canal from Karnal to Delhi under Shah Jahan, the entire township of Lalpur near Rohtak was destroyed. So, in historical time period, what we have seen is that Yamuna has been a very significant river, as most of the ancient and medieval dynasties prospered around Yamuna river. But in recent few decades, what we have done is that we have destroyed the river Yamuna, and it has become very polluted. In fact, because of the pollution of the river Yamuna and the kind of damage that we have been doing to the river, the Uttarakhand High Court in 2017 ruled that the Yamuna river has human rights. In fact, the court declared that the river Ganga and Yamuna have the status of living entity. Now, this having this status of living entity, what does it mean? It means that anyone polluting the river or harming the river in any way can be penalized the way a court punishes for hurting a human being. Although such kind of living entity status was given firstly by New Zealand, where Wanganui River was given the legal status. But if we look at the various mythological texts, the rivers in India have already been considered sacred, and they have been given goddess-like status. The rivers in India are actually central to the cultural life. most of the religious festivals in one way or the other are associated with the river. Just look at the various rituals. The river in most of these rituals play a vital role. For example, take you start from the birth to marriage and even death. In all these rituals related to birth, marriage and death, the river plays a very significant role. So, river actually confers as some kind of a benediction ever and always. So, we can suggest that Uttarakhand High Court's order was actually in sync with the traditional understanding of river in India, and this traditional understanding is that of a mother. In other words, the living entity status is actually steeped in Indian tradition and culture. So, what exactly has led to the water pollution in the river Yamuna over the years? Now, the 22-kilometer stretch of Yamuna from Wazirabad to Okla Barrage is one of the prime polluting zone of the Yamuna river, and it is between this stretch that Yamuna receives water from some 17 sewage drains of Delhi. Downstream, the river is further polluted by domestic and industrial wastewater from Noida, from Mathura, in Agra, and the Hindon river coming from Ghaziabad and Muzaffarnagar, they also pollute the river Yamuna. So, Yamuna's water quality in the Himalayan segment after the confluence with the Chambal river is relatively very good, but the domestic discharges from Delhi, Ghaziabad, Noida, Faridabad, Mathura, Agra and various other cities has rendered the water of Yamuna unfit for any use. In Delhi, the dumping of garbage in stormwater drains has been a typical pattern. So, what you do is that later, when you realize that there has been, all the natural stormwater drains have been filled up, you clear up the dump and then you cover the drain, and then you use the area for various kind of urban amenities like the bus depot. So, I'm afraid the governments have made a right mess of all this, and for all the future governments, it needs a lot of political will to undo all this. Let us understand that rivers clean itself every year during the flooding, and you just have to stop draining filthy sewage water into the rivers. So, these storm water drains, which become very active in the monsoon season, it has to be revived, because it is through these drains that the water, the monsoon rainwater will go into the river and recharge the river, and it will also recharge the groundwater. So, all these have been the problems behind the pollution of the river Yamuna, and Delhi has been the prime reason where Yamuna has been polluted. Now, because of this, we are losing a significant part of our culture. Water pollution in the Yamuna river, for that matter even in Ganga, has affected the culture of the riverine community. The people living close to the bank of the river were earlier completely dependent on the river water, be it for food or for irrigating their land. And now that the river water is polluted, it has affected the aqua life. The fishes have become extinct. So the fish, which was a rich source of protein for the riverine community, is no more available for the villagers. The villagers who are living close to the river used to fetch water from the running river earlier on. But as the flow of water has diminished and it has become polluted, the villagers have now to depend on piped water. So, other than the food and a drinking culture, we are also losing the rituals associated with the rivers. The fishers community has also lost their livelihood due to the water pollution. And as the rivers play such a crucial role in all the rituals from birth to death, the toxin level is affecting our culture as well. So the river is no more source of benediction for us. Now, what we can do for the revival of the rivers like Yamuna? The government of India has set up an empowered body for the rejuvenation of the rivers, and one of the most ambitious of such rejuvenation project is the Namami Gange project. Under it, many sewage treatment plants have been developed along the rivers in different towns. In fact, similar cleanup Ganga projects were undertaken even under previous governments under the Ganga Action Plan, but all these had little success. We must realize that the rivers cannot be rejuvenated only by pollution abatement steps. It is essential that many other related strategies have to be worked out. For example, making villages along the rivers open defecation free can be a very effective way. Most importantly, we must check the drainage of sewage water into the rivers. And for that, it is essential that sewage treatment plants are set up at the colony level, at the local level. In other words, it has to be decentralized. So the treatment plants have to be decentralized, and there should not be all the wastewater going to a centralized kind of a sewage water system, and then we discharge the treated water into the river. I mean, this is not good. The scientists have proved that even those treated water that we release in the rivers are not completely clean. Now, this what we should do is that through these local treatment plants, the treated wastewater should be used only for irrigation purposes or for toilets in the households. So, we should try to create this kind of a network of water supply system, so that we provide the treated water through the the sewage or the sewage water only to the households to be used in the toilets and not for the drinking purpose. Then similarly, government must try to restore older ponds, lakes, the wetlands. This will not only provide a solution to the water shortage, but this will also lead to recharging of the groundwater, what we call as the aquifers. All the natural drains should be restored, and they should be allowed to become live during the monsoon rains that happens. So the encroachment of the breadth of the river need to be stopped, and river mapping should be done based on the old land records, so that we allow the rivers to meander freely, because rivers have all these breadths of the rivers are basically wings of the rivers, and it should be allowed to flow freely when during the monsoon, or when there is a summer and melting of the glacier takes place. The river are able to deposit the sediments along its beds